So we got to have a conversation about this picture. If you've seen it lately, this picture of Papa John's founder John Schnatter at a Trump rally. And the reason we have to have a conversation about it in this space is because Papa John's in recent weeks and months has been intimately connected to HBCUs in one way or another. Almost a year ago, Papa John's gave a $500,000 donation to Bennett College in the midst of its accreditation issues and trying to help that school secure financial solvency. They've given gifts to Simmons College of Kentucky. Kentucky is where the Papa John's Corporation is based out of. All of this is in the aftermath of John Schnatter, the founder and former CEO of Papa John's, having been discovered to make racially insensitive and inflammatory remarks. And he's ousted from his position leading the company, but still remains on its board. And over the course of the last month, Papa John's has launched a campaign with Shaquille O'Neal to try to, quote unquote, bring a better day to Papa John's. In other words, a better day for black folks to believe in the pizza product. And Shaquille O'Neal is leading that initiative. And part of that initiative is the effort to bring Papa John's franchises to HBCUs. I don't know if Papa John's realizes it, if John Schnatter realizes it, if a lot of the corporate heads around Papa John's realize it. But if they haven't, or they're unwilling to, they're going to find it's going to be a hard financial road to connect with HBCUs on this tip. And it's for this reason. If you don't understand that for a lot of black folks across the country, and particularly at HBCUs across the country, that Donald Trump, the Trump administration, a Trump rally, a Trump political rally, is quickly becoming the living and breathing version of the Confederate flag to our communities. There's no purpose in trying to sell us somebody who's willing to carry that Confederate flag and say, ignore that, there's something we can do for you. Now, there's a big difference, particularly coming from me, because over the last 3 years or so, I've been adamant and will continue to be adamant that, love him or hate him, whether you think he's a racist or not, HBCUs as institutions still have to interface with the federal government, with the White House, to secure resources, to be apolitical, to make sure that our long-term interests are served. I tell people all the time, in writing, in person, in speeches, you can't have it both ways. You can't say ignore Trump in one respect, don't have him come to your campus, don't go to a meeting, don't participate in quote unquote photo ops, but then you want your schools to be eligible for grants from the U.S. Department of Education. You can't not interface with Trump and not interface with the people who support him and then say, but we need more resources, particularly from the public trust, the federal government, state governments, when the majority of our institutions are in Republican leaning or Republican dominated states. So you can't have it both ways. You can't ignore him, but then say, oh, can we use your administration to help us get by and stay open? It doesn't work that way. And it doesn't work that way with any political party. But the Papa John's thing is a lot different. This is not taxpayer dollars that we're talking about. This isn't money that black folks have paid into a system and have to work politically to leverage the most out of that system so that we can get a return on our tax paid investment. Okay, so there's a big difference between that and corporate interfacing. Shaq was going to introduce a plan to quote unquote bring a Papa John's to every HBCU across the country. And this was going to start at Miles College. Now this picture is surfaced. So the guy who founded Papa John's, who still owns a substantial ownership stake in the franchise, the guy who may not be the face of the company anymore, but certainly has a voice in its direction and certainly has skin in the game in terms of ideology about how to grow business, who to market to, what kind of messages to send. This is not political gamesmanship. This is not taxpayer dollars. This is not leveraging the public trust for our benefit. At this point, if we're connecting HBCUs to Papa John's, and a guy who still has an ownership stake in the corporation is showing up to Trump rallies and still willing to be showcased as a person who supports ideas and supports controversial presence that is more than offensive to our communities, this appears to be a brand that we can't and shouldn't align with. Not because we're unwilling to work with people with different ideas, not because HBCU communities are unwilling to work with white folks, not even because we're unwilling to work with conservatives. We are willing to do all three. We're not willing to be trolled. We're not willing to be a community that says you can break us off with a few pennies, or you can find an African American and convince us of anything. You can piss on our head and tell us it's raining. This is not Trump. Even though John Schnatter was at a Trump rally, he ain't Trump. He's not somebody who's going to be in control of the purse strings for another year or potentially another 5 years. Who's going to pick the person who's going to distribute grants and financial aid structure and resources to colleges across the country. John Schnatter is not the guy who forgives loans to private HBCUs that were ravaged by Hurricane Katrina. He's not the guy who's giving or trying to mandate that states do better in matching funding for some of our land grant colleges. He's not the guy who is working to mandate year-round Pell. John Schnatter ain't Trump, but he loves Trump. We don't. And unlike Trump, whom our communities have to work with, we don't have to have a Papa John's on every campus. And if this guy and his political beliefs are so strong and so powerful to him that he's willing, as a public face of a company still, even though he's not in the commercials flipping dough and all that, if he's still willing to make himself a public caricature of Trump support and Trump mania, then that's a mania that our campuses don't need. Because the last thing that we need to do, even if it costs us money, even if it costs us a couple of gifts, because the truth be told, Papa John's hasn't broken off multi-million dollars to an HBCU. $500,000 to Bennett was a marketing campaign, just like they're doing with Shaq now. And every store that they want to put on an HBCU campus was going to be revenue for them off of our backs. And you're not going to make money off of us when somebody who's still attached with your company wants to troll our sensibilities, right or wrong. It's not for me to say, oh, John Schnatter shouldn't be connected with HBCUs just because he supports Trump. There's a whole bunch of Trump supporters that work with HBCUs on a daily basis, inside and outside of politics. But the front-facing idea that he can continue to be a face of Trump support, particularly corporate support, is not one that goes well with HBCU communities, right or wrong. And I think it's best now if Papa John's just cuts this ruse, stops playing us for fools and thinking, oh, we'll get Shaq and he'll convince black folks to love us again. Not really, man. Shaq can show up on any HBCU campus he wants. He'll get a lot of love. He's not going to be welcome with that Papa John's pizza box. He didn't go to an HBCU. He may be a donor. He may be an advocate. But he ain't that good that our communities are willing to be trolled corporately by a guy who shows up at a Trump rally, which at this point is the equivalent, the modern day equivalent of carrying a Confederate flag around or going to a cross burning. Just because he doesn't show up on our campus doesn't mean Shaq makes it any better. It's not to suggest that we don't need corporate support. It's not to suggest that Papa John's isn't the ideal partner for HBCUs. It's just that while this guy is attached to the company, he's not the ideal face of uniting with our community. And until they get that, until they're able to rein him in or disassociate themselves from this person, there's no possible way that students, alumni, faculty are going to accept this corporation coming to our campuses, because to them, and reasonably so, Papa John's popping up on HBCU campuses across the country is a slow descent into everything that is against what we stand for. That we'll do anything for the money. will do anything for the clout. Now, we should do a lot of stuff for the political clout because without it, our schools can close. And a lot of people don't agree with me when I say that, and I understand it. I understand the emotion, I understand the politics, I understand the cultural ramifications of all of that. The truth of the matter is 80 to 90% of our campuses run off federal dollars. We got to work with whoever is in the White House and whoever their proxies are in the various agencies. But Papa John's ain't the White House. And if Papa John's thinks that they can send a black agent and convince us of anything, while their biggest agent is telling another story, then they need to know right now that every dollar they spend and every message they create and every moment they spend planning is going to be all for naught because the community is going to reject it.